Welcome to 360 Pulse. I'm your host, Jennifer Sertl, exploring the cutting edge of immersive technology. At Circle Optics, our camera system innovations are transforming how life-saving resources are delivered, ensuring aerospace safety, and revolutionizing immersive experiences. On this podcast, we feature the pioneers and innovators driving these advancements, bringing you the pulse of immersive technology. Our guest today is Ted Schilowitz. Ted Schilowitz is the pioneering futurist and innovator in the film and entertainment industry, known for his instrumental role in the development and commercialization of red digital cinema. As one of the founding members of RED, he helped revolutionize cinematography with the RED 1 camera, which brought high-quality digital filmmaking to the forefront of the industry. Ted also served as a futurist for major studios, including 20th Century Fox and Paramount Pictures, where he actually explores and advocates for emerging technologies such as virtual reality and augmented reality. A frequent speaker and thought leader, he is recognized for his visionary insights into the future of visual storytelling. Welcome to the program, Ted.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I look forward to having an interesting discussion with you, Jennifer, and learning more about what the latest innovations that you guys are working on, and maybe bringing a little bit of insights from many years of me being in the various forms of the camera and technology business to some of your listeners.
I love that. And can you just how did you and Zach, for those of you listening, is the CEO and founder of Circle Optics, how did the two of you meet?
It's a really good question. So obviously by full disclosure, I'm an advisor to Circle Optics and have been for many years through all of its up, downs, and sideways of growing a small and important company that has really, really unique offerings in the business. And I think it was either at an NAB or a CES. Those are two big conventions that focus on media and sort of future offerings for entertainment and whatnot. And maybe Zach got introduced to me through somebody else and he wanted to meet with me. We met him in a hotel room and he showed me the very beginnings of this device called the Hydra camera that was basically taking a new approach to 360 immersive video, of which I was really interested in and still continue to be interested in and have a lot of opinions on when it starts to get right and where it starts to go. And he had a very unique approach to that. And wanted me to kind of help him and give him advice. So that's how we met and continue to stay friends and stay connected on the project. So that's the little bit of the backstory. There's plenty more there, but that's the top line.
No, I think I love that because not every, I think the level of advisement that we get is remarkable. And so not everybody knows Red Digital Cinema. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. But for our listeners that this might be new to them, can you just explain the technology?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing to do, just if you literally haven't heard of it because you're just not in the camera business or a fan or aficionado of camera technology, is just go to red.com, literally the color red.com, and it'll give you a sense of what the camera is, what it does, some of its background. It's been around since officially 2006, unofficially 2005, when the founder of the company, a guy named Jim Gennard, started it. He was also the founder of Oakley, which a lot of people know, a big sportswear and apparel and sunglass company. He connected with me, and I was the first employee of the company, and we started on this journey together to find the engineering teams and build our own custom sensor and eventually build our own custom camera from the ground up that kind of revolutionized the cinema industry and moved it legitimately into the age of using high-tech solutions and digital technology to give a viable, logical, and artistically pleasing alternative to 35 millimeter motion picture film for high-end movie and TV acquisition. And it was very successful in many ways as it matured and grew into a viable, logical solution over a number of years. And then, as you might imagine, when you have a sort of a significant breakthrough like that, there were many followers. So now there are probably 10 or more companies that build very similar products to what the Red does, and the same philosophy of a very large sensor image that emulates what the joy and beauty of large format film was doing. And over the years, it increased in its sophistication, in its form factor, in its what we call dynamic range, or the overall what the camera can see from the lightest to the darkest parts of the image. And continues to be sort of a major force in the industry. And like if you go on the website, you'll see all the things that you happen to watch in movie theaters and TV, and you're like, oh, I had no idea all these were shot with this camera. That's pretty cool. There's a lot of stuff.
That's fantastic. I'll be sure to make sure that this podcast comes with a blog as well, with those embedded links with that, which is really, really great. Before you go into your role as a futurist in the film industry, we've not yet interviewed a futurist. So what is tell us, how do we put a frame around a futurist, and then take us into being a futurist in the film industry?
It's interesting. How do you put a frame around a futurist? Because a big part of why I'm a futurist is I have been a protagonist and a believer in we are in the end stages of the traditional flat screen. And we are emerging into what comes past the traditional flat screen. So for our lifetime and our grandparents, great grandparents, and maybe one generation before that, understanding of what a screen is a grid of pixels or light emitting sort of information diodes that has a beginning and an end. We know where it starts, we know where it ends, whether it's gigantic like an IMAX theater that has a 100-foot screen, or tiny like a smartphone that has a 4 or 6-inch screen. They're all roughly the same thing. They all do the same thing. They communicate visual information on a flat plane of information that is a grid of these pixels that we as end users know where it starts and know where it ends. When we start to move past that, we get into what comes after the flat screen, which is more of a simulation-based screen technology, very commonly referred to as virtual reality or mixed reality, or in some cases, augmented reality, or globally, we use the term XR or extended reality. And I've been involved in that for now, I don't know, 15 plus years, really more like 40 years. And that goes to my sort of theme park connections, which is a whole nother story to tell you about if you want. But I believe that there are many, many ways to enchant and delight an audience. And looking at a rectangle or a square of pixels is only one way. I think a lot of other people agree with me too. So when it gets to the question of how do you become a futurist and what the hell is a futurist, to me, it's kind of a nonsense title and a nonsense job. Like I used to joke, and still to this day joke about I work in a pretend industry, the motion picture industry. We make pretend for a living, and I have a pretend job in a pretend industry. I get to pretend for a living and pretend even more pretend than most of my colleagues that still have to live in the here and now, in the this is what we do today. This is how we can deliver content today. In my world, it was less about that and more about what does tomorrow and a few more tomorrows down the road look like when it comes to creating, delivering, maturing content, and exploring new ways to think about entertainment. So it became a weird sort of career for me when I retired from the camera company. Some very close friends of mine in the movie business, because I worked with all the big movie studios making these big studio movies with our technology, were like, yeah, you're not going to retire well. Come help us figure out the future. And it was like, well, what kind of, that's not a job. What do you want me to do? They're like, we don't know. You got to figure it out, but we'll pay you.
I
like,
love that.
Okay. And that was that. So 15 years later, I'm still doing it, which is very weird.
I think of all of the science fiction stories that were written and that we're now building that technology for. So I think, things occur in the imagination, and then they actually, then you get to hold them. So it's kind of neat, a person that's kind of having their foot in the past, present, and the future. So, given all of your years in the film industry, and I'm sure you've got lots and lots of great stories, what emerging technologies or trends do you believe will be the most significant? I love the language you're using as joy-based, wonder-based, and I've not yet had a guest talk in that type of language. So, tell us about what emerging technologies or trends you think are significant.
Well, I think it's interesting that you brought up that television and movies are often the the foreteller, the crystal ball to what the future will actually be. And the company that I've most recently worked for is Paramount, and one of their IPs, one of their major IPs, is Star Trek, right? And Star Trek is probably one of the biggest harbingers of what actually becomes real. If you could pick one piece of media that basically understood how to define what the future would be in terms of the products and services and content delivery mechanisms would be used, it's Star Trek. Like, it's hard to find something. I mean, you could argue that H.G. Wells in novels kind of did it too, which he did very successfully. But Star Trek, from a visual language standpoint, came up with the communicator, which ultimately becomes the cell phone, comes up with the Bluetooth headset. Like, I used to joke in speeches I used to give around this technology that the last cool person that ever wore a Bluetooth headset was Lieutenant Uhura from Star Trek, because she had the original little, wireless headset, and she was communicating with somebody, aliens or the remote team down on the planet, and it was a little wireless bud that stuck out of her ear. And really, until Apple made that cool, there was like 30 years of like, wearing a Bluetooth headset is the uncoolest thing you could ever experience in your life. Like, what is with that like creepy salesman guy that has that black stick sticking out of his ear, and it's like so important that he has to keep that in his ear all day long? The last person that made that cool was Lieutenant Uhura, until Steve Jobs, or post Steve Jobs, made that cool again, right? With little white buds that we put in our ears and somehow are fashion forward now and acceptable. And I could give you a laundry list of all kinds of things that come from the world of Star Trek. But maybe the most appropriate to your question is when you look at the evolution of what we call technology as it relates to visual storytelling. There's a continual thematics in Star Trek, both the original series and then the Next Generation, where they started to define terminology around it, called the holodeck, right? And if you're a Star Trek fan, you of course know what I'm talking about, right? The holodeck is a simulation environment that you go into. You don't actually wear a headset, although in some cases they wore stuff in Star Trek as well. But the entire environment becomes this simulation that to your brain and your body feels real. So you're actually in it. And a lot of that comes from theme park logic. You know, the idea of when you go to a themed attraction area, they were really the most innovative and the most experimental around what can we do with screen technology? How can we evolve it? And how can we connect it to a ride vehicle and to move the person through screens, not just watch screens, and let them interact with them in certain ways, which then, of course, you can, take a tangent there and look at interactive entertainment, which has become a huge, huge business as well as creative force, and how that has evolved, and then link that to virtual reality as it links to gaming and entertainment across that field. And then link it to your world, which is how do we evolve the camera tools, the actual tools that are required to shoot and make this kind of imagery to create simulation-based entertainment, not just screen-based flat entertainment.
Wow. And just to tie into the Star Trek, our internal name for one of our cameras is called the Geordi Visor, which is our Pegasus drone application. So,
the Forge.
Yeah. So the language of Star Trek is actually, very much alive in our innovation conversations about the products that we're building and all of that. And I think, can you just talk a little bit about the technology of the sphere? And do you feel like, is that type of, I know it's not scalable at this moment and it's pretty elite, but do you see, tell us a little bit more, help us kind of get our hands around an immersive experience that you're building, or can you, I feel like I'm getting an intellectual hit, but not an immersive hit of what's coming.
So you're talking about the MSG sphere, the big ball in Vegas?
Yeah.
So I did about 2 years of consulting work on that at the very earliest stages of its evolution. In a lot of the ideation and the visualization, we actually used virtual reality to be able to show the executive team what it would look like to sit in a giant ball that was that big, that was like literally the size of a basketball stadium, and surround yourself with this imagery and some of the pros and cons of that when you're still in a physical space. And how do you create that illusion that is sort of like a holodeck, but it's like a holodeck meets a concert venue or a movie theater, right? Yeah. So it's an interesting kind of like series of trade-offs as to how you create something that has an audience capability and an economic reality and all these other things. It's really interesting. There are other sort of pieces of that puzzle that kind of lead you to the sphere as a giant version of that. So planetariums have been doing dome-based entertainment for generations. Going back to the theme park world, one of the most beloved theme park rides, when you sort of do audience kind of surveys, what is their favorite ride? One of those favorite rides, other than like the Haunted Mansion or Pirates of the Caribbean, is a ride used to be called Soaring Over California. Now it's just called Soaring. I'm connected to it because the director of photography that shot the new Soaring, the first Soaring Over California was all shot with IMAX film cameras. The second gen, when they went soaring all over the world, was shot with red cameras. So connected to that from a sort of technology standpoint. And essentially it's a virtual hang glider experience where they put you in a hang glider simulator, and there's like 40 or 50 of them in this giant room, and it's all kind of controlled by hydraulics, and it looks like a hang glider. So you sit and your feet dangle and you feel like you're in a hang glider. Like, I'm sure very few people have actually done a real hang glider, so it's a simulation, and they surround you with enough screen real estate in this sort of dome-like experience that it starts to become a simulation. It starts to become like the holodeck, and you start to believe it's actually happening to you. You're not just watching it. So you're flying around, and the visuals are tied in their motion characteristic to the physical movement of the glider. So you as an audience member are not just sitting in a chair watching a movie, you're being moved in a very precise fashion, just like it would be happening in the real world if it was really doing it. That's why we call it a simulation. It's a really, really joyous ride for people. It's like something that a lot of people would have loved to experience, but it's just too expensive, too dangerous. They're just not going to do it. So they get a chance to do it in a simulation fashion. And it's so refined at Disney that it's a remarkable ride, right? So I think the Sphere kind of has like a legacy of that. Mm-hmm. And when you see the Sphere in Darren Aronofsky's first movie, there are a couple of shots in there where you feel like this motion is happening to you. But of course, because you're in a static chair, it only can achieve that simulation so far. But it still works to a certain extent. The Sphere is interesting just because of its girth, because of its size. But what's really interesting is kind of a nuanced conversation around spherical entertainment and the experience of spherical entertainment. And this, everyone will understand this based on the way we use screens now in our lives, is your screen experience and the perception of size of that experience is based on a number of characteristics. And one of them that's really critical is your relationship to the screen, your physical relationship to the screen. So there's a sort of magic calculations, which scientists can tell you about when things start to feel immersive, not fully spatial or fully simulated, but immersive, right? An IMAX theater that has, call it 300 seats in it and a screen that's 120 feet across and very, very high gives you a sense of immersion, and it works really well. And you can take those to scale. Right. There are, like I said, planetarium domes have been doing this for years in smaller scale. The Sphere is kind of like the ultimate version of that on steroids. And because of the cost of the build and the exoticness of it, you'll probably only see either just that one or maybe a few of them around the world. There's another company called Cosm that is their lab was based in Utah. I think they're actually a Utah-based company. Their first open location is in Los Angeles near the SoFi Stadium, near the football stadium where the Rams play and the Chargers play. And they have a smaller version that is hundreds of seats, not thousands of seats. It may be close to 500-600 seats, I'm not sure, but it's definitely not 18,000 like the Sphere. The experience is very similar and in some ways better because it's slightly more intimate, and your relationship to that screen and that screen sort of surrounding your visual plane is really powerful. And the real advantage is they can build hundreds of those because they're not so exotic that they cost billions of dollars to build. They cost millions of dollars to build. A lot of millions, but not billions.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when you go into one, the experience is very similar. Now, what you get out of the Sphere, which is really interesting, and one of the things I always thought was going to happen with it, it's primarily going to become a concert venue because where it is in Vegas, and because of its size and its scope, and because the artist can use this giant visual palette to create something where there's a live performance and then this visual experience. Like The Dead was just there recently. And before that, it was U2. And then there was Fish. And the next group that's coming is the Eagles. I'm a big Eagles fan, so I look forward to seeing the Eagles in the Sphere. But you have to make kind of a creative choice as an audience member as to the kind of experience you want, because you can sit way back in the third tier or fourth tier of the dome of the Sphere, and you can watch this giant visual, but the band is like so far down and it's so vertical that they look like ants, and you're kind of looking down on them, right? Now the visuals are unbelievable, but you're not really getting a live concert experience. You're getting like, there's almost no reason for the band to be there. Like you could just record it and it could just be visual. But if you sit in the 100 section or the floor seats, then you've got actually the opposite experience where you're watching the band and the visuals are kind of like up and around you, and you're more focused on the live experience, but the visuals sort of surround your senses. So it's almost like the best ticket to sell for a concert, if maybe they figure this out, if anybody from MSG ever listened to this podcast, would be an interesting idea, is basically you want to buy a 2-for-1. Like, so you want to see the show twice. You want to see the show once from the floor and once from the sky, so, especially if you're a fan of the band. So you can actually experience the visuals and experience the band. And maybe they give you a discount or something if you see the show twice.
Right. And then
my business idea for the day.
I love it. And then to me, there's also the experience of the crowd. Like, there's this community aspect of it. And I'm a little like, from the types of questions I want to ask. One is about AI. And after we talk about that, I want to go back to the actual experience of cinema and how that's going to change. So just because I think it's important, and it's such an important topic right now, the impact of AI on filmmaking, with it becoming so prevalent in so many industries, how do you see AI shaping the future of filmmaking and content creation? And is this anything that you spend sleepless nights about?
Not sleepless nights, but definitely sleepless moments. So I have a lot of opinions on this. The first one is it's nothing's really new here, which is kind of like, what? That's often shocking to people when they hear that, like, everybody thinks this is like some new blossoming thing that suddenly is going to take over everything and take over their lives. In a dystopian version, that may be true. But in the reality version, this is no different than any other advancement in what we do with compute technology. And we've been doing this for generations. Machine learning in various ways is doing lots and lots of processing and artificial intelligence that add productivity and qualitative value. So like, we're recording this on 2 microphones and you're using Zoom, even though I'm sure very few people will actually look at our faces. People are just going to listen to this on their, their audio podcast server, whatever they use for Apple or Spotify or whatever it is. There's all kinds of AI going on in here. There's AI processing going on with the microphones for noise cancellation, to improve the voice, to deal with latency of the internet signal, because all this is IP based. There's all kinds of AI layers going on. Pretty much any modern car you get into today that has any kind of not full self-driving like a Tesla. I mean, I'm a Tesla guy, so I've been driving, self-driving for a long time. But many, many, many cars of various price points all have like kind of an automatic cruise control and a smart cruise control where it measures the distance and stuff. There's massive machine learning and AI going on in that sector, right? When it comes to entertainment, there's a philosophical discussion about artificial intelligence that actually goes all the way back to the very beginnings of the first photographic image, which is kind of a strange thing to talk about for a lot of people, because not a lot of people talk about this part of it. But the minute we realized technology, and at the time I'm talking about is chemical technology, right? And mechanical technology, was able to make a recreation of a form, whether that's an animal, a human, a piece of real estate, whatever it is, and tell a story with that form using technology that once you captured it, didn't require the live elements anymore. You took the actors that were typically stage actors of the time, right? I'm talking about in the like 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. And you were able to use a chemical technology to duplicate them, to make an artificial version of them that somehow looked a little bit like them. And eventually, when they added sound, sounded a little bit like them. That's the beginnings of artificial intelligence for the motion picture industry, right? And then the intelligence part just gets stronger and stronger and stronger every 7 to 10 years, to the point where we figure out, oh, well, we can make it add sound now. We can make it higher resolution now. We can make it color. We can put it on all different kinds of screens. We can connect it to all kinds of things. We can make it interactive, et cetera, et cetera. I could give you thousands of examples of this word artificial and the word intelligence, which often is not so intelligent, but we'll use it as a subject matter, right? So now here we sit in the mid 2020s, moving into the early 2030s, and computers and graphic engines can do so much with so much level of sophistication that we're able to create things like deepfakes, like voice synthesis, like bending reality. But the minute we took an early black and white image of, say, Charlie Chaplin, we bended reality all the way back then. Because now Charlie Chaplin didn't have to go perform on a vaudeville stage every night to do his art. There was an artificial version of him that could be distributed and disseminated in a very wide fashion, right? And all we've been doing for the last 120 years is evolving that science. Over the last 10 years, and really over the last 18 months in terms of its public consciousness, there's been a lot of science dedicated to dealing with that evolution. And now you're seeing economics being poured over it. You're seeing investment capital being poured over it in ridiculous sums. And you're seeing this belief structure that many, many, many things will change. Well, many, many, many things will evolve, but I doubt many things will actually change. Things will alter in terms of job resources, who does what. There will be political implications. There'll be economic implications. There'll be all kinds of very drastic implications that are showing up already and will continue to show up. But that's just an evolution on what humans tend to do. Now, in the end game, will humans end up destroying themselves because of it? And are we reaching the last stages of viability because of our eventual push to continue to use technology? That's an interesting philosophical discussion. And if you really want the ultimate version of that, watch the movie War Games. If you've never seen the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy from the 80s, I guess it was. I mean, Matthew Broderick was a
Ali Sheedy, Breakfast Club,
16-year-old kid.
This is a shout out to Generation X.
Yeah, I mean, watch the movie War Games.
Yeah,
because the key line there, the key phraseology is the only way to win is not to play.
Ooh, that's a powerful phrase. The only way to win is not to play. I do want to move to one other thing, and then, I wish we had all day because there's just so much here. But I want to really talk about the medium of cinema. There's a theater infrastructure all across the United States. And can you share, how people are consuming media from streaming to immersive experiences? What do you believe the future of the cinema will be, or how do you believe people will get their material? Like, storytelling won't change. How people get their stories will change. What's your view of the future on that?
Well, I think storytelling will change and will continue to change, and is changing every second of every day, right? People are figuring out how to use technology and narrative in new and creative ways all the time, and that is historically accurate. Like, there are different ways to tell stories. Now, there's a very opposite thesis there that we only tell 6 stories. We tell the same 6 stories over and over and over again. So you can kind of argue it both ways, and the truth is somewhere in the middle there. In terms of the overall understanding of how things evolve, how bricks and mortar evolves into digital, how the ability for people to find content, consume content, and enjoy content is changing and evolving, and really probably for the last 25, 30 years has moved into this very ease of discovery, ease of like, I can find it somewhere, what I want to watch. Now we've almost jumped the shark. If you know the Happy Days reference to there, we fully have jumped the shark in terms of the amount of content that is available at our fingertips, or our remote fingertips, and whatever device we want to use, that we can get pretty much anything our heart would ever desire, to the point of ad nauseum, to the point where it all becomes almost meaningless. So assigning and defining meaning to individual pieces of content becomes harder and harder and harder to do. Finding something that resonates at a level and a scale that matters becomes harder and harder to do. It's not impossible, and it does still happen year over year. There's a few breakouts that matter across many, many mediums, right? Across what's being done on YouTube, what's being done on TikTok, what's being done in streaming, what's being done on traditional television, and what's being done theatrically. But the theatrical industry as a business is in a continual shrink mode, no different than live theater, right? In its heyday versus what it exists today. The economics are still significant for live theater, for Broadway around the world and all of its versions of that. But it's probably a $6 or $7 billion business across all sectors. Theatrical business worldwide is maybe a $40 billion business across all sectors, actually going out to see a movie. And obviously that's dwarfed by streaming media and video games and all forms of what we call home-based media or mobile-based media, which is, hundreds of X bigger than that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but in terms of like the evolution of this, there are areas that will continue to shrink and become more exclusive and valuable in different ways to different people. And I think we're on probably a very dark path to the lack of value of content as an industry.
What I love about the point that you're making, though, for those that are listening, like I'm a coherence builder. And so there is room for people that build coherence to help shape. It's almost like you really need to understand this piece of the material, or, we need people to create frames around things in order for them to make meaning for us. I understand you have your own podcast, and I want to make sure that people have the ability, because I know people are going to want to, like, I hear, Jennifer, we wish we had an hour with Ted. I can hear them saying that already. What is the name of your podcast? And I'll be sure to include links to it.
Yeah, well, they can have hundreds of hours if they want it, because we've done, I think, over 200 episodes now. We started it, at the beginning of the pandemic, and so there's 3 of us on it. When we started it, it was myself and my friend Charlie Fink, who is a writer for Forbes magazine, was a Disney executive. And then we would often have a frequent guest named Roni Abovitz, who was the founder of Magic Leap, which is a mixed reality device company that has gone through all kinds of interesting moments in its evolution. He left that, started some other things, and we had him as a guest so many times. We're just like, you should just be the third co-host. So for the last, I don't know, couple years, it's been the 3 of us, me, Roni, and Charlie. The podcast is called This Week in XR. You can find it on all the different platforms. We do it almost every week. Like I said, I think we're over 200 shows now. We talk about kind of the weekly news around extended reality, and these days we talk a lot about AI, because there's a lot in the news about AI. So we do like 10 minutes of news, and then we bring on a guest, and we have all these different guests from all parts of the industry, kind of like you have me on today, talking about something interesting, and we learn from it, and our listeners learn from it, and it has grown to a really large audience. Like, a lot of people listen to it, a lot of people find it and send us notes and say that we should keep doing it, and it's a fun part of our week. It's basically an hour a week we get to gather together and do our little show.
Sounds really fun, a great collaboration. And the last program that we had recorded was with Jonathan Berube, and he might make a really fun guest for you as a content creator in Avatar and Stranger Things and many other things. So I want to thank all of you for joining the program. We want to thank the Institute of Optics, Genius New York, Luminate Accelerator, AFWorks, Cider Technologies, Archangel Imaging, and AUVSI. Special mention to our producer, Scott Fitzgerald at Rockfox Studios here at the epicenter of optics in Rochester, New York. I really would love you to connect with us, subscribe to our program, find us on Twitter or X, depending on how you call it, and LinkedIn. We're very interested in how immersive technology positively impacts human connection. And if you know of a story or a guest we should feature, please reach out to me, Jennifer at circleoptics.com. Thank you for joining us.